Welcome everyone to the UCLA Longevity Center webinar. I'm Linda Ercoli, and I'm currently the interim director of the Longevity Center. And I'm happy to bring you a talk today on intergenerational relationships where the benefits are reciprocal. So we'll be providing an overview of two Eisner Foundation funded programs at UCLA that are noting the reciprocal benefits of bringing generations together, the GenerationXchange program and the TimeOut at UCLA program. And I want to introduce my two distinguished colleagues who are pioneers and leaders in this field. First, I want to introduce Dr. Teresa Seeman. And Dr. Seeman is a professor of medicine and epidemiology at UCLA, and she's the associate chief for research in the Division of Geriatrics in the David Geffen School of Medicine. She's trained as a social epidemiologist with postdoctoral training in neuroendocrinology. And Dr. Seeman is an internationally recognized researcher whose work focuses on understanding how the events and situations we experience impact our health and our well-being. And she has a special interest in understanding how those experiences influence our trajectories of health as we age. And I will let her tell you much more about the interesting and impactful things that she's doing. Our other speaker today is Dr. Lourdes Guerrero, and she is an adjunct assistant professor of medicine at the David Geffen School of Medicine and the UCLA CTSI evaluation team. And she's focusing on research education, training, and career development programs. So before joining CTSI, Lourdes worked in the Office of Graduate Medical Education, and her research agenda includes health disparities and public policy, evaluation of educational programs, diversity and workspace development, and women in academic health sciences. So I want to welcome you both today to talk about your two sensational programs, the Generation X, as I call it, is shorthand, and also the TimeOut. So I'd love to hear more, and so would our audience, about what you do, and tell us a little bit about these programs, please. Lourdes, would you like to start? Great, thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about TimeOut at UCLA. As been mentioned, TimeOut is an Eisner funded program that we are able to implement in collaboration with the Youth Movement Against Alzheimer's and UCLA undergraduate and graduate students. TimeOut at UCLA is an innovative program in that it tries to bring together older adults with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias with our UCLA undergraduates. They have an opportunity to socialize and have meaningful conversations. Before the pandemic, they would do this in person together on the UCLA campus, and now they're actually doing it virtually. The goals of the program are to create these interconnections between the two generations, at the same time giving our caregivers some much needed respite. And what we have found is that the students in doing this are usually inspired to hopefully continue considering careers in aging, gerontology or geriatrics, as a result of their volunteer experiences. What we have found in terms of outcomes on the older adults and the caregivers that participate in our program is that we do see reduced caregiver stress and clearly reduced levels of isolation with the older adults that participate. Our in-person program had students and older adults engaging not only in conversations, but in stimulating activities as well, including doing crafts or working on puzzles, lots of board games, sometimes. And our sessions were about 4 hours long, 3 to 4 hours long, depending on how long the older adults wanted to be there. And our virtual sessions have been limited to about an hour. So the virtual interactions have been shorter in time, but we have found that they've been just as meaningful, which has been a great finding for us. We pivoted to a virtual timeout after the pandemic started in March, and we found that we still see statistically significant changes in students' attitudes on the scale that we use with them called the Dementia Attitude Scale, where we assess their feelings about working with older adults with dementia, and we do see increases, positive increases, even with the short time that they spend with the older adults through virtual timeout. And through interviews with our caregivers, we have heard them tell us that even with 2 hours a week of interacting with their undergraduate students, that they see changes in the older adults in their level of conversations that they have even after timeout, that they see improved mood, the days that they are engaged with their students, the days of timeout, they see improved mood. And overall, the best comment we hear is that the older adults light up when they start talking with their younger colleagues, and they look more like their old selves when they're engaged in these conversations with our UCLA students. So at this point, our program is still new in the sense that we have not been able to replicate it on a large scale. Our numbers are pretty small. We only have in virtual timeout right now about 40 students matched to about 40 older adults in the program. So we don't have a very large group of people, but we certainly see the benefit and are trying to partner with other organizations and other youth programs like Dementia Friends, like, oh, I'm blanking on the name, but we're looking at partnerships with other youth programs to increase the number of students that we can incorporate into this and hopefully replicate the model elsewhere.
One of the things that I hear a lot about in my working with patients and families is people say, I don't know what to talk to grandma or grandpa about, or let's face it, I don't know what to talk to my husband or wife about often when somebody has something like Alzheimer's disease. What kinds of conversations do the young people and the participants have? Have you eavesdropped on any of them? Or
we do for various reasons. We do to make sure that everything's appropriate and especially with virtual timeout that there's no technical issues. But we do train the students before they interact with the older adults, and we have a whole list of potential topics that they could engage with. But it's the students themselves that are so creative. They have actually, especially in virtual timeout, they have found links to museum exhibits, to virtual field trips, they'll share a lot of their own pictures of their own travels, of places on campus. They talk a lot about their careers and life decisions, and they just love to hear what the older adults, what tips or wisdom they can share with them about making choices. So, there's some generic they discuss, but they're also, they really do become friendly with each other and get to know each other a lot better.
And one more question, because we're going to move to Dr. Seeman, and then we're going to bring you all together and talk together about this. But how does somebody get involved in timeout?
So at this point, our participants are referrals from the UCLA Dementia Care Program. So our older adults participate through a referral process. When their dementia care manager refers them to timeout, we follow up with them and we invite them to participate. And our students are vetted through the UCLA Volunteer Center mostly. And then some of our students are also students in an aging cluster class as undergraduates at UCLA. So they do a volunteer experience with timeout as part of their classwork.
So is it during the school year? Is it like a seasonal recruitment, or is it year round?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So we tend to follow the academic calendar for the undergraduates because that's the group of students that we have as our volunteers. So we do tend to have, like now, our winter quarter, a fall, and a spring quarter. And we have had a summer session, but it tends to be a little bit smaller than our fall, winter, and spring quarters.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and where do you see this program going in the future? What are you thinking?
Sure. So I'm so excited to say that we are going to pilot TimeOut at Belmont Village. So we're going to recruit a different set of older adults, some with cognitive impairment and some without, and sort of expand our reach that way, especially right now with the pandemic and the concerns with isolation. So that's a partnership that we are exploring. We are also thinking about trying to replicate this on other college campuses. Our partnership with the Youth Movement Against Alzheimer's was our initial attempt of replicating this project on other campuses, and it didn't quite work. But we are still sort of looking actively for programs that are on college campuses that we could serve as sort of their volunteer outlet or their service learning sort of component, and see if we can't do this in other places.
Fantastic. I mean, 40 sounds like a pretty big number to me of participants, but I could see the value of really having this opportunity available to many more people to give, you know, like you say, the caregivers a break to enrich the lives of both the younger and the older generation. So it's fantastic. I try to reach out to you when I can, and I really believe in your program.
Thank you. Yes, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that we would have never thought about offering a virtual version of TimeOut previous to this, and now we see that it's worth having. So even when we go back to in-person TimeOut, which we are committed to doing, and we believe that the longer time frame is super important for our caregivers to have a slightly longer chunk of time to themselves. But we will continue also having a virtual component because we see the benefit.
Well, hats off to you for your adaptability and creativity to be able to punt during
the kudos to the older adults that are willing to figure out the technology to get on there and do it. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm going to turn to Dr. Seeman for you to tell us about the Generation Exchange program and what you're finding with your research.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to talk about Generation Exchange. It's one of my favorite topics. So Generation Exchange, like TimeOut, is an intergenerational program. In this case, we're trying to bring together older adults and elementary school children. And as the title of this session indicated, the goal of the program really is to try to generate benefits for both the older adults who are engaged and also the children. That's where the name Generation Exchange comes from. So the program basically recruits adults 50 years old and older. We train them to work in elementary schools. Currently, we work in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade. We are in 5 elementary schools in LAUSD. This is a partnership between UCLA and LAUSD. We are starting a 6th school in February. And we train our older adults. We have a training. It was in person up until COVID. Now it has been online. And much like what Lourdes described, one of the really wonderful things about the whole nasty COVID pandemic has been how much it has shown us about how adaptable our older adults are and how enthusiastic they've been about learning how to use Zoom, how to get into breakout groups and work with the kids over Zoom. It's really been highly successful. I mean, they all say they miss the kids, that the minute they're vaccinated and they can get back in the classroom with the kids, that's where they'll be. But in the meantime, it's been very rewarding to see that we can continue to work with the kids, even in this remote instruction environment. The program is structured so that our adult volunteers are required to work 10 hours a week in the schools. They're in the schools all year long. And the reason that we do this is we really want them to both provide a real dose of tutoring and mentoring for the kids, so hopefully to move student outcomes in positive ways. But even more importantly, that the older adults get a sufficient dose of involvement in the program, which we think is health promoting. Being involved in the program is very social. They're interacting with the teacher and the kids. Most of our volunteers are doing it in the remote environment right now. They're online almost every day with their teachers and kids for some portion of the day. When it was in person, they were in the schools at least a couple days a week. And that it's social, it's cognitively stimulating, it's very emotionally rewarding working with these kids. And it's also physical activity. So you have to get to the school and, you're walking around during the day. And so the feeling was if they put in 10 hours a week all year long, hopefully that would be enough intensity dose for them to show some health benefits. So we require 10 hours a week. We also put a minimum of 10 people in each school. So there's a team of Gen Xers who you interact with. So you also are building these social relationships with the members of your team. And there's a weekly team meeting where you can get together and share both your successes with the kids, but also challenges. And so your teammates are a source of advice about if you're having trouble connecting with a kid or having trouble seeing positive changes, you can bring those issues to the group, and hopefully somebody in the group has had a similar experience. Because we're in grades K through 12, once you get beyond kindergarten, frequently somebody in the team had that child in an earlier grade and will say, oh yes, I know so-and-so, here's how I was successful in reaching them doing the following. So that's sort of how the program is run. We've been in LAUSD since 2015. We started in one school with 5 to 7 older adults. We are now in 6 schools, and this year, once we staff up our 6th school, we will have over 60 volunteers. In the 2019-2020 year, last year, we had 50 people, and we provided over 17,000 hours of tutoring and mentoring to the kids. We are seeing positive outcomes for both the older adults and the kids. For the kids, we're seeing improvements in reading scores for the whole classroom. We're seeing significant reductions in office referrals. So when a kid starts acting up, the teacher can now have them go sit with our older adult volunteer and work with them rather than sending them to the principal, which is great. The principal doesn't really want them in the office. It takes the kid out of the classroom. It reduces their instructional hours. So now they can work with a Gen Xer. And they're doing the same thing with breakout groups. If a kid can't seem to, work with the class, they'll have them go to a breakout room with one of our Gen Xers and work with them there.
So is it one-on-one?
It can be one-on-one, or it's more small groups. So the teacher will put together a group of 3 to 5 kids and have them work in a breakout room now with one of our older adults. When they were in the classroom, most classrooms had a corner of the classroom set up with some small desks and a chair for the volunteer, and they would take small groups back there to work with them while the teacher worked with the rest of the class.
So I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do all children in the classroom have the opportunity to work with the Gen Xer?
So I would say yes, over the course of the year, that seems to be the case, that even kids who are basically doing really well get a chance to spend time with the Gen Xers. It's like having your grandparent in the room. But I would say that the main purpose, obviously, is to provide extra attention for kids who may need a little extra individual attention in order to, catch up or deal with some issue they may be having. So the kids who are struggling a bit more probably spend more time with the Gen Xers than the kids who are doing well. But over the course of the year, we're in there, we get into the classroom after the first 4 weeks of school. So school usually starts early to mid-August. We're usually in there the week after Labor Day. And then they're in the classroom all the way through till June. So over that 9-month period, they do end up working with most of the kids.
How do you decide on the school that's involved?
So that's been
advertise?
interesting. We started out, the two people who work with me are people who had worked with in South LA before. One of them has an expertise in community groups with older adults around health issues. And the other one had expertise in schools, educational issues. And so Dawn Purnell is our education expert. And she knew a number of principals and picked the first principal as being the best choice for somebody who would be willing to take a chance and try this program, because we hadn't done it yet. And he, sure enough, he did it, and it worked really well. And then he helped us pick the next 3 as colleagues of his who he thought would be open to the program. And now we have them clamoring at the door. The word is out in the South LA schools, where most of the schools are underperforming. Those principals have heard from the principals who have Gen X, and we have people sending emails, calling us. We have a list of over a dozen principals who want the program. We're just trying to find the funding to be able to, recruit and staff those schools. So finding schools has not been a problem. There's lots of need out there in the LAUSD community. In terms of the older adults, we recruit from the communities around the schools. So at the moment, our older adult volunteers are predominantly minority volunteers. And we've seen some really exciting health benefits. So we've seen some significant reductions in weight. That's probably the thing our volunteers are most excited about. I have a couple of people who've lost significant weight.
The tutors or the students?
No, the older adults. These are
Okay.
the older adult outcomes. So weight loss, blood pressure reductions. People are walking faster and have greater lower leg strength, I think partly because they're more physically active as part of the program. And then we have some very exciting preliminary data, a pilot study that I did with my colleague here at UCLA, Steve Cole, looking at gene expression. And he had done some work a while back on how, as people develop greater sense of well-being and purpose in life, it seemed to have beneficial effects on gene expression in terms of reductions in pro-inflammatory activity, which is good, and increases in antiviral activity, which is good. That antiviral activity is what will help protect you against COVID, which is a virus. So he wanted to look at whether participating in Gen X might be impacting gene expression in beneficial ways. So we did a preliminary study looking at changes over a 9-month period from entry into Gen X in the fall till the end of the school year. And we published a paper recently showing that indeed we did find beneficial changes. So the shifts were towards greater antiviral activity and reductions in pro-inflammatory activity. And so Steve and I actually are in the process of submitting a research grant to actually do a randomized trial using Gen X. So some schools get Gen X, some volunteers get into the program right away, and then others are in a wait list and they get in later in the year to look at whether we can document more formally that participation in Gen X may have benefits for your immune function.
So I'm seeing things pop up, and I want to open this up to Lourdes and you and I at this point, but I see a couple of questions that have come up. One person wants to know, how do I qualify for the program, which was one of my next questions. How do you get involved if you're a Gen Xer? What do you do?
So we recruit, and we, if you're interested, you can send a note to me. We also have a website. I can get that out to you, Linda, and people can go on the website. There's contact information for giving us your name and a phone number. And one of our staff, either Deanne Morris or Dawn Purnell, will get in touch and find out, sort of tell you a bit more. You've now heard most of what they would tell you about the program. Make sure you're interested. make sure you're aware of the, requirement that you be available and willing to put in 10 hours a week. And usually what happens is we generally are recruiting and training for people to start in the fall. So right now, we probably won't be doing any more trainings for this year, obviously.
Okay.
But we would love to have names of interested people so that when we start organizing for the new year, for the fall 2021 launch, then we would, get in touch and let you know when we're going to be training, get some sense of what schools you might be interested of the schools where we're actually, active, our program is active. And then, if you're still interested, we would have you come to training, and then you would get assigned to a school that has an opening. If we
You mind if I, oh, I'm sorry.
No, if we have a new school, then, all the grades are open. If it's a school that has an opening, it may be a specific grade level. We also let people tell us what grade levels they prefer.
Okay.
Some people like the slightly older kids, some people like the really, really young kids. So we try to match you as best we can with what's available with a grade level that's, of more interest to you.
Do you mind if I type out your web address for people to?
Oh yeah, so they can just do my email. So T Seeman, do you want me to put it in?
I got it. T Seeman
at mednet.ucla.edu. And let me just confirm for myself. Let me find our website. Hang on. I can post it in a sec. I just want to be sure I get it right because they just changed to a new one. Okay, here it is, Linda. I can post it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great.
To everybody.
Okay, awesome.
Here we go. There we go.
And I think this is a good question to introduce to everybody, for Dr. Guerrero as well. Do you match on culture, race, ethnicity, or do you do any kind of sensitivity training in your programs?
Do you want to go ahead, Lourdes?
Sure. So we do request bios of our older adults when they're referred to timeout and they express interest in participating. We also have an application process for our students. Usually we try to match our students and our older adults on interests. So because many of our older adults have a relationship with UCLA, they were either faculty or former students or were in the area, or were staff at UCLA. So sometimes we try to match them either on career interests or similar hobbies. Oftentimes, also match them on language. So we have found that some of our older adults love it when they can speak to our students in their native language. So we do matches that way, but other than that, we don't necessarily do pure matching on race and ethnicity issues or matches. In our training of the students, we do talk about those issues and how to be sensitive, but we really talk more around listening, the importance of listening and being patient with our older adults versus really racial ethnic differences.
Yeah, so for our project, we have, at least to date, we have generally not done any kind of real matching. I mean, we take interested adults. We do have training in dealing with a number of the kinds of issues that may come up. The schools that we're in are predominantly minority. Most of them are about 50-50 Hispanic and African American because we're currently working in South LA. We have targeted the areas of LAUSD and in particular South LA where there are a lot of schools that are underperforming. So a lot of kids who could use some extra tutoring. And those schools are heavily minority population, student populations. To date, we've largely pulled from the local communities, but not all. We do have people who are working in the schools who don't come from the local communities. And we welcome anyone who's interested and, you know, wants to work with the kids. The kids really just are looking for, you know, a positive, supportive adults go a long way.
I can't stress enough how important both of these programs are to reducing loneliness. And I'm sure you've experienced this in your work, and people experience it in their daily lives, particularly because of the pandemic. I mean, that has really brought this forward. But one of the things that, you know, that I got from your readings is that loneliness kills. That really stuck with me. I see it in my patients when they're lonely. I really worry about them. I see depression. You know, you see cognitive decline in older adults, and you see more helplessness. But these are like wonderful ways to address that. And I'm wondering if you can speak on some personal observations or stories of any of your participants about how this helped them in their, you know, in loneliness on the adult side, or even on the student side, because students get lonely too.
Go ahead, Teresa. I'll tell my story after you.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think one of the wonderful things to watch in the program is how, you know, people come in at the beginning of the year and frequently end up in a team with some of the people you may know already, but a lot of times they don't know each other. And just how quickly they bond together as a team unit, and within that frequently build these amazing friendships. So there's a pair who got written up in a book that Lydia Denworth wrote called Friendship. And she had heard about our program and came and interviewed one of the teams. And there's a pair of women who she interviewed who I had assumed they were best friends from the beginning. I thought they came into the program already best friends because they seemed so tight with each other from the beginning. It turns out they didn't even know each other until they got into training, and they bonded in training, and, you know, to an extent that I was watching them thinking they were best friends, and they were just getting to know each other. And now they're inseparable. You know, this is now 4 years ago, and they're not the only ones. So people build these incredible relationships, not only with the other people on their teams. The other thing that we've discovered, which was not part of my original thinking about this program, is there's a third generation that's benefiting from this program, and that's the teachers. They build these amazing relationships with what they call my Gen Xer. And we have these parties at the end of each year. Well, we didn't this past spring, but we're hoping not this year, but next year. And I cannot tell you how many teachers have come up to me and said, basically, if you try to take my Gen Xer away from me next year, you know, you're going to be on my hit list. I mean, they are just incredibly tight. And that's been the other thing that has been really wonderful to watch, is just how important those relationships are. A lot of the teachers say it's like having another mother or another father. I mean, we have more women than men, so a lot more other mothers. And, you know, who give them all kinds of life advice. Forget the teaching part of it. So that's the other, I think, really wonderful relationship that I think goes both ways. It's great for the teachers, and I think the Gen Xers are also equally tied to their Gen Xer, you know, their teacher.
Yeah, from TimeOut, I mean, we hear stories of our students really being moved by their experiences with TimeOut and confirm their desire to go into geriatrics and gerontology, for example. And for us, that's such a big win, because most of our student volunteers are, you know, sort of pre-med kinds of students. And if they can go into their medical education with a commitment to geriatrics, it can only be beneficial for all of us, you know, in the field. And in terms of the caregivers tell us stories of how they've seen their loved one change after participating in TimeOut. the interactions that the older adults have with the students really is so different than the normal relationships they have in their lives, that it touches a different place in their mind and in their hearts. And there was one caregiver in particular whose father not only had dementia, but sort of recovering from a stroke. And the students are really patient with our participants, and even for the ones that aren't super chatty, especially when we have time out in person, they could work silently on a puzzle together, or coloring, or doing something together that wasn't totally verbal. But now with virtual timeout, even for this particular older adult who had dementia and was recovering from a stroke, through using visuals with the student through Zoom, and just the patience that the student had with this person, this older adult actually started talking more and became much more verbal by the end of the quarter. And the caregiver was like, we haven't been able to do anything to have him come out of his shell the way that the student was able to do this. And so we do see the effects that are maybe not totally quantifiable yet. We haven't instituted some of the biomarkers that Dr. Seeman has included in her studies to see those effects on our populations, but we definitely hear the stories that point to those changes.
It sounds like the caregiver stress is addressed indirectly by not only having the respite time, right, the break, but to see your loved one happy, because we know in the research, if patient is unhappy, caregiver is unhappy, and that there's enrichment in the life of the person with the Alzheimer's disease or other type of dementia, which I think people forget, that, or they don't realize that there is still that person in there, and it's harder to reach them, but feeling like you have a purpose in life and that you're contributing is so important. And even somebody who has a severe memory problem, through their friendship, and their wisdom can be contributing still, and to have them feel that benefit is so it's so important. That sometimes it doesn't happen at home, right? Because they're feeling like you're trying to take away my privileges and my driving and my this and my that. And here's a place where that's not happening, right? They're giving. So
yeah, we had a caregiver tell us, gosh, my mom talks more to the student than she does to me. Like, it's one word responses to me, but she has these all full conversations with the student.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm wondering, do the caregivers ever are they there watching, or do they actually leave?
When we had in-person timeout, clearly the caregivers could drop them off and leave. Oftentimes at the beginning of timeout, the first couple of sessions, they might stay for a little bit longer and then leave. But really it was a drop-off kind of program. With virtual timeout, because of the technical difficulties, we ask that they sort of be around if possible, but they definitely don't have to be on the Zoom with the students at all. It's usually, once they're logged in and clicked in, the caregivers usually then step away.
One of the other aspects of this that struck me was about friendship, and how important friendship is in aging individuals. And I'm wondering if either of you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as my example earlier, that these two women who I had watched their interaction and thought they were really good friends already, and it turned out they were building the relationship right there in front of me, and I hadn't realized it. And I think, that happens a lot because people come in with at least a shared interest in working with the kids. So you already got a certain common element there. And then I think the team structure where, you're in a school with these other adults who you see on a fairly regular basis, and you have these team meetings, and it really does build these relationships. And what's been really nice is, with the whole COVID situation where everybody's supposed to be social distancing and staying apart, our ability to get everybody onto Zoom has allowed them not only to continue engaging with the classrooms, but they still have their weekly team meetings. And now they're having all these other meetings that they just use it now as the way they socialize. And I constantly hear about people getting together via Zoom now, for all sorts of things. We have a couple of different book clubs, and they have a drinks club where they get together at 5 or 6 to have a glass of wine together. But it's been a way for them to maintain those social ties, even while staying apart to keep themselves healthy. So I think the program in its original form did a lot to build those social relationships, but it's been really rewarding to see how the whole Zoom skills has allowed people to maintain a lot of that while we're in this horrible distancing environment.
And introducing people to technology that maybe wouldn't used it before.
A couple of them told me they've been able to impress their grandchildren.
Yeah.
They were very pleased that they were able to show this new skill that the grandchild didn't teach them. They learned it, and now they're telling the grandchild what they can do. So they were just preening. They were so
It's another
thrilled.
way. It's another way to relate.
And they're now in touch with the grandchildren.
Exactly. Exactly. What about policy? Like, what can we do from, now we're talking about something that's ground up and grassroots. Can we do something on another level to promote these type of programs?
I mean, I hope so. I always say my dream is that, if we can show how beneficial this is to both generations, could you show that it's a very cost-effective investment? And could you get, state departments of education and or, Medicare, or, the feds in some way to financially support intergenerational efforts like this, because they do end up having benefits for 2 generations, if not more. Yeah. And so I still hopeful. I can't claim that I see a whole lot of movement in that direction quite yet, but I'm still hopeful.
Yeah, and on the timeout side, I mean, we are lucky that UCLA has an aging cluster program where students sort of select into this year-long focus, and it allows these students who may or may not have ever expressed an interest in working with older adults to seriously consider majoring or looking at a career working with older adults, and in that sense, it's important on an educational level that other campuses consider having these aging sort of focused kinds of programs early on in their careers, in their college careers, so that we can have more professionals looking at working with aging policies, populations. I mean, the aspects of that a focus on aging can touch, from engineering to art to education to health, right, to social work. I mean, there's so many facets that a focus on aging would have. And so if we can show the benefits of an intergenerational program that is a win-win for the students and is a volunteer activity, so it allows them to have a more robust resume when they apply to grad school or medical school, I think it's just beneficial for everybody. So we're hoping that we can replicate this on other campuses to spread the benefits.
Yeah, I mean, loneliness is a social problem, right? And we are having not only loneliness, a social problem, but caregiver burnout is another social problem. Taking care of our elderly who have dementia is a social problem. Because, right now, most of the time, it's the individual who's left to kind of solve their own problem. whereas other types of issues do get more attention from federal and state governments. And I was just wondering, thoughts on why hasn't, and I don't know the answer to this question, but I would appreciate if you have any thoughts of like, why do we have to prove so much that taking care of our older adults is important, that taking the stress off of the caregiver is important, that solving, these social connection issues is so important. It seems like it's obvious to us that work in gerontology, it is, but I'm just wondering, have you ever thought about that or encountered some obstacles to this in your work?
So I have to share with you that, our initial collaboration with the youth movement against Alzheimer's was very local. They helped us recruit our UCLA undergrads to volunteer for our program. But the leader of the youth movement actually has moved way beyond TimeOut and has actually been advocating to create an AmeriCorps program focused on providing respite for older adults and providing relief to caregivers and, sort of a paid year of youth working with older adults. So it's sort of like an AmeriCorps, a Peace Corps kind of program focused on older adults. And, it started with his work with TimeOut and the youth movement at UCLA. So I think our young people are, think big and are entrepreneurial. And we could probably ask them to give us ideas how to make big changes. I think as academics, we get stuck in wanting to prove before we think big. And I think, we should channel some of their energy to think big first and figure it out as we go.
That's true. Absolutely. Teresa, we're getting close to the end. Any comments or final thoughts from either one of you, either on this or another topic or another aspect of this that you feel is important to tell our webinar viewers today?
No, I guess I would echo Lourdes's comment about, thinking big and thinking outside the box. I mean, I think there hasn't been a lot of focus on intergenerational benefits, and they're there. We can be really innovative. These are two examples, but, it seems to me it would be great if we could come up with an array of intergenerational linkages that offer opportunities for people to do a whole variety of different things that involve intergenerational activity where it's beneficial to both parties. And, part of the reason Gen X and other programs like this that I worked on even before Gen X got the idea for them came out of discussions where, we were hearing from sort of the government that, this growing population of older adults, that rather than seeing that as a resource, a wealth that we could tap, that it was going to be a drag and it was going to consume all kinds of health resources and it was going to take federal and state resources away from other generations. And we were like, no, not necessarily. You can rethink that in a way where you take a look and see the resources that are available there and where you can structure activity that benefits both parties for the same dollars. And I do think that's something we need to really, I think frequently you get this sense that, well, if I invest over here, then it takes it away from these guys. And I think rather than a zero-sum game, that a lot of times, no, you can invest it in ways that benefit both.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's something that if we did more of that, we'd all benefit a whole lot more.
I guess we're not always looking at, we're determining what the outcomes should be and not what they could be or
right.
might be. And so you're right. I'm guilty of this myself as in academics. It's like sometimes we don't think out of the box. Right? You think about what's like most tangible in the moment, but it doesn't, like you say, thinking big is important and looking to the younger generation. And they're really going to be leading in this as well, because, as people live longer, they're going to be interfacing more with older adults. and, grandparents, whether they live healthy, long lives or they have lives where they're impacted by cognitive disorders or other disorders. So, and we have a lot of intergenerational households that I think can speak to this too. Whereas many people living together are multiple generations instead of having a nuclear family where your grandparents live 1,000 miles away and you see them twice a year. So I think we have a lot of rich, different types of family structures and cultural experiences that we can draw from in informing us about things like this. So anyway, thank you for those wonderful ideas. And I want to thank you both for being here and encourage people, if you're interested, to go ahead and follow up with either one of you. And I wish you luck in expanding your programs. And thank you so much for everything that you're doing.
Thank you for having us.
Both generations, or at least two generations, and for our teachers too.
Yep.
And I want to thank our webinar audience out there. Remember, we have a longevity website, and just plug in UCLA Longevity Center if you want to find out more what we're doing. And I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Lourdes and Teresa, and be well.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.